By April 1945, the German Wehrmacht was a broken machine. But there was one group that refused to accept the reality of their defeat: the Schutzstaffel, or the SS. These were the men who had been told for a decade that they were the biological elite of the planet. They didn't just consider themselves soldiers, they considered themselves gods among men. Even as the British tanks rumbled through the outskirts of their collapsing empire, these SS officers maintained a chilling, hollow arrogance. They believed that their black uniforms and their master race status gave them a permanent shield. They expected that even in surrender, they would be treated with a fearful high-status respect. They thought they could walk into a British camp, click their heels, and command the room. They were waiting for a world that still feared them. Instead, they met the British desert rats and the commandos, men who had seen the concentration camps and had zero patience for the theater of the master race. When a high-ranking SS officer tried to pull his rank on a group of weary British soldiers, he didn't get a salute. He got a reality check that would shatter the myth of the SS forever. The setting was a makeshift British checkpoint on the road to Hamburg. The British soldiers here were veterans of North Africa and Normandy. They were covered in the dust of 3 continents. They were tired. They were cynical. And they had just liberated villages where the local populations were starving, while the SS lived in luxury. Into this checkpoint walked an SS Standartenführer, colonel. He was immaculate. Despite the chaos of the retreat, his uniform was pressed, his silver death's head insignia gleamed in the sun, and his monocle was firmly in place. He didn't come with his hands up. He walked with a swagger, followed by 2 subordinates carrying his leather luggage. He approached a British corporal who was sitting on a crate, smoking a cigarette and cleaning a Bren gun. The SS officer didn't see a conqueror. He saw a subhuman laborer. He cleared his throat, and in perfect condescending English demanded to speak to the British commanding officer. He didn't ask, he commanded. He acted as if he were checking into a hotel, rather than surrendering to an army he had spent years trying to exterminate. The British soldiers watched him with a look of bored curiosity. They had seen this master race act before, and they knew exactly how it ended. The SS officer was eventually brought before a British major. The major was sitting in a tent, hunched over a map, drinking tea from a chipped tin mug. He didn't look up when the German entered. The SS officer clicked his heels, the sharp clack echoing through the tent, and gave a stiff, formal bow. He then began a long, rehearsed speech. He stated that he was prepared to oversee the transition of his district to British control, provided his officers were given appropriate quarters, kept their private servants, and were allowed to maintain their sidearms for personal protection against the locals. He actually told the British major, "I expect the courtesies due to a high-ranking officer of the European elite. We are, after all, civilized men." The British major slowly put down his tea. He looked at the SS officer's polished boots, then at his silver skull pins, and finally at his eyes. The major had spent the morning looking at the mass graves the SS had left behind at a nearby subcamp. The civilized mask was about to be ripped off. The major didn't scream, he didn't get angry. He simply leaned back and asked a single devastating question. "Why are you still wearing that hat?" The SS officer blinked. He touched his officer's cap, confused. "This is my uniform of rank," he replied. He walked over to the German, who stood a full head taller and didn't look up. He looked through him. "You seem to be under the impression that you are an officer," the major said quietly. "You aren't. You're a prisoner, and in my army, prisoners don't wear hats. They don't give orders, and they certainly don't tell me where they're going to sleep." Before the SS officer could respond, the major reached out and casually flicked the expensive silver-trimmed cap off the German's head. It landed in the mud of the tent floor. The German's face turned from a pale white to a deep vibrating purple. He began to shout about the Geneva Convention and military honor. He claimed that as an SS officer, he was a political soldier and entitled to special status. The major signaled to two massive British military policemen standing at the flap of the tent. "Strip him," the major ordered. "I want those silver skulls, those ribbons, and that tunic. If he's so proud of his status, let's see how he feels without the costume." This was the ultimate status crush. The SS officer was forced to stand in the middle of the camp, surrounded by British soldiers who were laughing and drinking tea, while his invincible uniform was literally torn off him. The silver death's headpins, the symbols he had used to terrify millions, were tossed into a bucket of scrap metal. His polished jackboots were replaced with oversized wooden-soled clogs. His monocle was stepped on by a sergeant from Liverpool who didn't even look down. The Aryan Superman was reduced to a shivering man in a gray oversized jumpsuit with painted on the back in bright yellow letters. He tried to maintain his master race posture, but without the high collar and the silver embroidery, he just looked like what he was, a middle-aged man who had lost everything. The British soldiers didn't treat him with hatred. They treated him with indifference. That was the true reality check. They didn't fear him enough to hate him. To them, he was just another chore, like digging a latrine or cleaning a truck. As he was marched toward the barbed wire enclosure, carrying his own slop bucket, the SS officer looked back at the British major. The major was already back at his desk, drinking his tea and looking at his mat, having already forgotten the German existed. The SS officers who survived the war often complained in their memoirs about the unnecessary rudeness of the British and American troops. They couldn't understand why their elite status didn't save them from the mud and the humiliation of the POW camps. What they never realized was that their status was a hallucination. It only existed as long as they had a gun to someone's head. Once the guns were gone, the master race was just a collection of men in fancy clothes who had committed unforgivable crimes. The British soldiers who delivered these reality checks didn't do it for glory. They did it because they knew that the only way to kill a myth is to treat it with absolute unbothered contempt. This is the story of the day the SS realized they weren't the masters of the world. They were just prisoners who had overstayed their welcome in a world that was finished with them. So, if you were that British major in 1945, what would you have done when an arrogant SS officer demanded to be treated like European royalty? Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story of true historical justice. Thank you for watching. Respect the fallen, honor the veterans, and never forget history. We will see you in the next video.